Greetings to all you fellow scrubs out there who pay for games on a subscription model rather than paying full retail price for your games, like normal people. To those who pray your most anticipated upcoming title comes to Game Pass and praying harder that your favorite doesn't disappear within the next 2 weeks. To those who are leaving the classic, golden, more simple age of purchasing a game from a store and keeping it forever, and adopting the non-permanent, collector-unfriendly Netflix-esque model for gaming. Whoops, there goes any and all hope for a sponsor from any brand affiliated with Game Pass. This is Xbox Game Pass in a nutshell, a potentially new series where, should time allow, I play through all the latest releases on the ever-changing Xbox Game Pass PC app, so you can keep up and see what the heck is worth playing, and what are your red falls so that you don't have to. Because if Xbox clearly lost the console war to PlayStation a decade ago, the least they could do is move over to the dark side that is the PC gaming world. And this video will cover about a dozen or so games, so feel free to use the timestamps in the timeline or description to jump to a particular game if you really like. Spoilers? One of these does end up genuinely making me cry. If you've already had a look at any of these games, you might be able to guess which one. Alright, so let's kick this one off with Arcade Paradise.
Been spending most their lives living in a pastime paradise.
It seemed like an appropriate first game to begin the month, since this past June my girlfriend and I went and visited the Galloping Ghost arcade in Brookfield, Illinois, which is home to one of the largest collections of arcade games in the world. But I digress. Reading the description, I was immediately convinced this would be one of those business simulator type games like Jurassic World Evolution, so I was surprised when the game immediately forced you to use controller only on PC and walk around the world in first person, and actually let you have access to video games in the meantime. You play as a teenager called Ashley who has gotten their first job managing their father's laundromat to finally bring you out into the real world of responsibility and hopefully break you away from your video game addiction. Only it turns out that that very laundromat has several functioning arcade machines in the back room between the lobby and the office, which is about as suspicious as a Burger King next to a vet clinic. Or an IKEA restaurant next to a stable. Anyway, you soon get the idea that fueling said addiction and installing more arcade games might actually help turn the business an extra profit and prove your stuck-up old man wrong. So you're made to run around the laundrette, washing and drying baskets of clothes that appear on your desk, or simultaneously clearing up trash, picking gum off surfaces, and unclogging the toilet now and then, all while these games lurk in the background as you turn your profit. And one thing that actually surprised me was how slow-paced this life simulator came out to be when I got most of my tasks done quite quickly. I understand that the game allows for your idle time to be spent having a quick bash on the customer arcade machines out back, but my brain had already entered into work mode and just wanted tasks that could help build up the profit, as I'm used to in similar games of this type. But speaking of the gameplay, the arcade machines themselves are very neat, and are probably my favorite aspect of the game, taking inspiration off of other classic games and even some of those mobile sorting type mini-games. And the fact that the arcade room has its own radio station with witty commentary just shows how much effort the devs put into details like this, which I seriously appreciate in a game like this. Unfortunately, an odd side effect I had from this experience is that going around the laundrette picking up all that gum and unclogging loos ended up making me feel genuinely nauseous and groggy after half an hour or so, putting me right off the experience altogether. This is the first time this has ever happened to me with a game, and it's quite odd considering how the modern Dooms are some of my favorite games at the moment, and those games are just Gore City incarnate. And considering the slow pace and just how long each day actually is, I feel sad to say that I'm not all too motivated to keep going on. I'm sure that as the game progresses, the arcade segment grows more and more prominently, and eventually the whole laundromat business model gets ditched entirely, but you could also visit a decent looking restaurant for the first time, and if one burger somehow gives you the trots, you're not exactly inclined to see if that was just a one-off, are you? Overall, I'm happy for the people who do enjoy this game, and again, I love the inspired takes on the arcade games too, but I think the biggest problem is the slow pacing of the gameplay. I appreciate that it tries to make up the mundanity of the tasks with these oh so radical mini-games, and I know the gradual transition from laundrette to arcade is supposed to feel rewarding, but normally the progression you have to begin with feels enjoyable enough before the actual extra rewarding parts kick in. Together Forever is apparently the 7th installment in this long-running RPG franchise that I've never heard of. It follows the story of a girl named Yu Jingshu who stumbles into a conflict between human, deity, and demon races upon discovering a strange spiritual fruit and mysterious young boy. And honestly, it's just fine. It's a hack-and-slash open-world adventure game featuring upgrades and side quests and respects the rule of no running indoors. The key strengths of this one have to be its presentation, in both its visual appearance and absolutely beautiful music, which creates such a rich atmosphere for this piece. Gameplay-wise, it's about standard. You've got your light and heavy attacks and specials that require mana, and enemies with quite substantially large health bars that will require a lot of big numbers to drain down. Though my biggest problem with the gameplay is that it seems to make up only 35% of the actual game. The vast majority of my experience was sitting down and watching cutscene after extended cutscene. Seriously, it's like they were trying to make a really large movie with little bits of gameplay and combat woven in between, and not in such a good way, and quite ironically just seems to pull you out of the immersion. Early on, we encounter this big creature who is implied to be our impending boss fight, but then we have to sit through this prolonged cutscene lasting for several minutes before the actual fight even begins, which went on for so long I was beginning to wonder if a boss would even happen at all. I get that there is a lot of lore, and it does want to tell its story, but there have to be more efficient ways of doing so while sticking true to being an actual video game. At the end of the day, it's just okay for me personally. Again, it functions just fine as a hack and slash, but does have a significant imbalance on gameplay to cutscene ratio. I've not got too much more to say about it, honestly. If movies are your thing during video games, then give this one a go, I guess. Otherwise, I'm moving on.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me. Cocked your head to the side and said I'm angry.
GTA 5 back on cloud gaming? Well, that's a surprise. Most of us have probably already played this game already, unless you're a child. Then again, everyone who was barely a teenager has played this since it came out. The game has a brilliant story, a great open world, iconic characters who are still remembered fondly today nearly 10 years later, and some wonderful subtle jabs at satire in every crevice. If you're one of those that hasn't had a chance to give it a look yet, now would be a good time. Many mid-range devices can run this thing just fine nowadays, so you don't need a chock-a-block expensive rig anymore. Then again, it's over on cloud gaming, so your rig doesn't even matter anyway. The graphics are upscaled for the Xbox One or the Xbox Series XS standards. However, unless you have access to supersonic internet speeds, you probably won't get to experience that for very long. McPixel 3 is quintessentially a choose-your-own-adventure sketch show. It's a pixelated comedy point-and-click adventure that's trying in the same vein as Henry Stickmin, in that you are a wannabe hero trying to save the day with some very unconventional situational methods. You need to optimize trial and error to click on various items in your surroundings and uncover which hilarious punchline it'll trigger, and whether it will somehow help you to save the day. Unlike Henry Stickmin, which relies on references and randomness for its humor, this game relies on kicking people in the balls and randomness for its humor. It's all very silly and relatively amusing, but I do think I prefer Stickman's approach in that I prefer that game's build-up and pacing before its punchlines. It also feels a bit barren in sound design in parts. There's very little sound effects in the actual game, which I think it needs when so many of the gags are about being in multiple scenarios and the humor is very slapstick driven. If I had to sum up Common Hood briefly, I would say that it's Stardew Valley's depressed cousin. A cousin who is very gifted in music and handiwork, but has always been very introverted and kept to themselves. And wears eyeliner. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but let's get to it. This is a first-person sandbox-type game that follows the story of Nikki, a young adult that due to the death of her father has been made homeless and has found herself taking shelter in an abandoned factory that has been dubbed as Common. Whereby she meets a community of other squatters who immediately take advantage of her by asking her to complete all their chores for them. So you have your community of NPCs who you talk to and receive a bunch of tasks from that consist of crafting a variety of different materials and contraptions, and slowly developing the space inside the abandoned factory into something more welcoming while uncovering extra lore about the place as time goes on. In spite of its misty and toned down colors, it still manages to be quite relaxing as far as these life simulators go, and it features an interesting crafting system in that in some cases you have to physically build objects like chairs out in the physical world with the materials you require, like a budget IKEA set. It's not a perfect system, and could be made slightly easier to understand, but it is an engaging concept I am down for, and I like the fact that you can build a layer too much sometimes, making you have to go back and fix your own mistake. Overall, it is another decent, laid-back, fairly relaxing life sim with progression through farming, crafting, trading, and management. It's got its bugs and kinks to be sorted out, including some visual errors, and somehow every tab in one of the menus being labeled contract, like it's trying to remind itself of the soul that it sold to Microsoft to get onto Game Pass. Also, it may just be me, but the days seem to be passing quite quick as well, Just when I was making progress, the game immediately locked me out of doing anything else with the crafting because it was already past my bedtime. Almost the opposite problem to Arcade Paradise in a way. It's nothing exactly stand out, but it is again a calm and pleasant ride once you get used to the way some of it controls. Oh, how naive I was, hoping for a fun little FPS campaign from a franchise in a similar vein to COD or Battlefield that I hadn't really looked at before. But it turns out there is no such campaign to be seen. Apparently there was one planned, but it got cancelled, so now we've got an exclusively multiplayer game on our hands. Well, alright, fine. So Insurgency Sandstorm is your standard modern-day Call of Duty style multiplayer shooter, following up from its standalone predecessor, which is a follow-up from the Half-Life 2 mod, and definitely not a follow-up to the 1984 game on the ZX Spectrum. And like most Half-Life 2 mods, it has inevitably abandoned the old Source engine to make way for Unreal, like they were the engine they told Source not to worry about, so we can stop comparing it to Counter-Strike now. Anyway, like Counter-Strike, this game primarily features maps in a Middle Eastern setting, pitching what are implied to be terrorist resistance forces up against government counter-terrorism military. But the gameplay follows the more traditional Battlefield model of holding down numerous control points over the map for the longest amount of time, upgrading weapons through experience and cycling through different classes of soldier who all carry a slightly different type of gun, not all of which are actually available at the start. Sorry, sniper mains. You'll be quick to notice the UI is quite reduced as well, mainly showing the scores for the teams and the weapon loadouts, while a health count and precise ammo count is missing entirely. Still, that's not a bad thing, and actually an intentional thing. It just means you need to be more careful and make strong use of cover and intuition, almost like they're trying to get you to think during these shooters. I also like being able to toggle between automatic and semi-automatic rounds on my assault rifle to slip through different types of shooting for different scenarios with ease, as opposed to waiting for my guy to fumble around for his other weapon while the enemy bullets are still flying straight towards you. And it's interesting that low stamina can reduce your accuracy if you've been running around a lot lately. This whole thing is all part of immersing you and thinking tactically, which all balances out relatively well, until someone happens to run up to you from behind and puts a single tap into your head. In the end, it still does feel like another one of your modern tactical shooters, and still kinda struggles to stand out from the crowd, but it's not too bad as far as the genre goes, and it's a solid pick for one of the smaller scale shooters on Game Pass. Don't worry, we'll get on to Exoprimal very soon, but this game happened to come up right before it, so we're giving this one a bash first. So, on the topic of multiplayer focus, Naraka Bladepoint is a free-to-play battle royale multiplayer. Free-to-play? So I'm not sure why they even bothered putting it on a subscription model if it's free to play anyway, outside of promotion. The unique gimmick to this one is that it focuses heavily on melee sword combat, asking you to get up close and personal with your enemies as opposed to staring at them from afar in a tower measuring contest. Until you do pull out your crossbow and shoot at them from afar anyway. After completing a tutorial and getting a basic grasp of what I was doing, I went to queue up for a nice solo match to warm up, only to find that you can't actually play on your own until you reach level 10, nor try out the game's campaign mode until you reach that same point. Well, looks like I have no other choice but to force some poor unsuspecting players with my entry-level ability and low game sense, since I've had no other chance to practice on other players who will almost always perform way different to any NPC training bot could do. Guess the three of us will all have to share the mask of immortality the game promises to the winner of the match. So to avoid this burden, I queued up for a solo bot match anyway, and it basically played out like you'd come to expect from a Fortnite-esque battle royale, except as a hack and slash instead of a third-person shooter. You've got your open map, enclosing circle, more loot to pick up than you know what to do with because of limited inventory space, but there's also an actual merchant as well, and some spontaneous side quests you can pick up on your way to try and help people actually gather up together. It is a well-playing hack and slash battle royale that captures this old Chinese warrior style of combat very nicely, and you can have a good amount of fun if you play with some friends who you can probably convince to play this game too, being that it is free. Though that being said, some people have reported that the game allegedly asks you to disable a form of PC protection to be able to actually play it, so do with that info what you will. And here we go. We have the brand new Day 1 AAA release of the month published by Capcom themselves. And they make you very aware of that by asking you to create a Capcom account in order to actually play the bloody thing. Since when did we start copying what EA did now? Come on, we're smarter than this. Anyway, after a whole plethora of brightness options and customizing a whole new character for cutscene viewing only, you find yourself in the near future where hordes of various dinosaurs are swarming in all over the earth, probably as revenge for burning up all their remains gains as petrol, and it's up to you to join a team of soldiers in class-based Power Ranger-type suits to gun them down. But it turns out this AI has trapped you in a repeating loop 3 years in the past, where you and a bunch of other random players fight off hordes of past dinosaurs, and the only way to stop them is to simply keep playing along in its game until your NPC crew can figure out just how to stop it. So you get taken to a dinosaur culling sequence on the same island with a varying final objective, where the winning team is determined by who can speedrun the round the fastest. While the main story does feel unfocused and weirdly progresses solely from just keep playing the multiplayer over and over again, I will admit that I did find the core gameplay loop to be rather enjoyable. I actually found I preferred it over Aliens Fireteam Elite, although there are a few things I wish they had brought over from that game, like more story focus that progresses during the actual gameplay, and utilizing their characters more outside of sitting in the carrier all day talking about missing files that just hand the story out to them like missing pages from the script. Especially given the promising roster we were introduced to at the start, I just think it would be nicer to see them out in the field too. I'll tell you what it feels like though. It feels like the Overwatch 2 PvE that we never ended up getting, with its suits that have various abilities based on assault, tank, and support units. You've even got your own Reinhardt-esque unit who walks around with a giant barrier in front of them. It's also a nuisance how much time and hassle it takes to swap suits in the middle of a grace period, which is the only time you really get to do it outside of death, especially when you're encouraged to do every single objective as quickly as possible. It's a shame really, since this was my only opportunity to show everyone my character model I'd worked so hard on. Either way, I still see this as a game I'd find myself revisiting just for the dino blasting fun. While it's not perfect, it still has that right kind of energy and adrenaline for mindless dumb fun in a mindless dumb concept.
Look at this photograph. Every time I do it makes me laugh.
And now we return to the more relaxing side of Game Pass, but one of the more cutesy relaxing games. TOEM, or TOEM, is a small game where you play as this little lamb who's traveling around town, collecting different photos of things that they find along their way, all to either help or impress the locals around them. Some of the photo quests you get granted are straightforward, like where a character will ask you to take a picture of a type of rock because he can't seem to find the one that's right behind him, and others come in the form of simple puzzles where you have to use your intuition to figure out what will make this walking deer happy. And there's not too much more to say about this game outside of that, because that's basically what the premise is. It's short, tranquil, and wonderfully paced with its simplistic presentation that will appeal to the objective completionists looking for a few short hours to spend skipping around and taking cute photographs. And something like this is more than welcome for the Game Pass.
Lock it, fill it, curl it, find it, view it, code it, jump and lock it.
And this brings us on to our first early access game from the bunch, and by the looks of it, a very recent one too. The premise of this one is that this is a first-person factory building automation sandbox set beneath the surface of an alien planet, and a beautifully luscious one at that, with a wonderfully vibrant and colourful backdrop. And like TOEM, it's actually what I'd argue to be one of the more relaxing games from the roster so far as well. It teaches its mechanics very intuitively, and the ambience of both the music and the very, very soft machine drones feel extremely calming, and actually entices me to stick around with this type of game. It's funny because I've never once played Factorio, nor have I fully wrapped my head around the more complicated industrial mod packs for Minecraft, which add similar machinery to that game, but this game that isn't even fully completed yet may actually be one of my new contenders for favourites of the month. Obviously there's only so much you can do on it for now, but if the devs keep going at the level they are at right now, I can see some good potential from a game like this.
In the underground, we'll find someone true.
Blimey, we've had a hefty number of games to get through, so as I've already started doing, I'll try not to spend too long on the rest of these. The Cave is currently a cloud gaming exclusive as far as PC access goes. It's one of the oldest that was added to the past this month, ported from the Xbox 360, and follows the cautionary tale of 7 or 8 different characters of different backgrounds whom are all to uncover the darkest part of their soul in the pursuit of their own desires by entering the strange and unusual cave. Or 3 of them are anyway. Would have been nice to have known that when I tried to walk the lot of them inside of it and then ended up forced to stick with the 3 who I happened to walk in there first. Anyway, this being from the creator of the Monkey Island series, you can expect a black comedy of errors which features your selected champions experiencing moments from their stories through the narrative gameplay. The cave environment environment itself transitioning into whichever set piece suits the heroes you've chosen, all of whom are chasing their desires, and their plans being inevitably thwarted in some comical way. The control could have done with some work, as the characters all seem to carry a bit too much momentum on most of their jumps, but outside of that, this is a solid side-scrolling adventure game with some interesting puzzles dotted around. It might get a little bit repetitive, replaying for the sake of seeing every character's story, especially when there's 7 of them, meaning that you will have to go through a couple of them twice, but it's different, it's classy, and it's well worth a look. If, again, your internet can take it.
It's not right, it's not how we used to do.
Maquette takes us through the narrative and memories of Michael, and that one time he fell in love with a fellow artist. So naturally, as you're progressing through their story together, and everything's all going very well, there's that ever-looming turn in your stomach that something's going to f this up somehow, whether that be themselves, or some external force, or even both. It's published by the same people who published a memoir Blue, which you can tell by its art style, an emotionally engaging narrative, and a plethora of music cues. But instead of simply walking from chapter to chapter, or just clicking on the next secret button like in Memoir, this game actually incorporates puzzle and critical thinking to move between chapters, so now I can get away with actually calling this one a game unlike Memoir, when I did written reviews over on Medium. Set gameplay involves using a central Maquette dome to pick up items in a repeating world and alter their size between small and large in order to complete puzzles and proceed on with said story. And also, unlike Memoir, this game actually ended up pretty much breaking me. I won't give off too much more other than that and the clever metaphor of the player being shrunken small during the pragmatically fitting moments, but be warned that this is a game that will grab hard onto your heartstrings. I am recording this just after finishing the game and writing this segment, so you can still hear that sorrow fresh in my voice, and anyone who knows me well will know that it is rare for any piece of media to break me. Only things I know to be true, and Your Lie in April, have ever done that. Well, I guess that's number 3 to add to the list. Sorry about that. Anyway, Figment 2 lets you fight a singing pig.
It's like death awaits you.
Figment 2 Creed Valley is an action-adventure game where you control Dusty, a character traversing a fantasy-esque personification of a human mind, acting as courage, fending off the darkness and nightmares by activating synapses and neural passages, and yeah, you get the picture, big brain metaphor. The main thing I really have to give credit for this game for is its artwork and art style, from the painted still images for the real-world plot, wait a minute, to the juxtaposing silliness and imaginary craft of the world inside the brain, and these quirky, singing characters who pop up all across your journey, such as 2 different opinions having an indefinitely long argument with each other, unable to come to any actual conclusion or compromise. And I also love the countering perspectives of having a closed and open mind, and a showcase of the benefits and drawbacks of either side and how they directly contribute to how you need to progress, finding different compromises between each side. Look, as a graduate of psychology, I find this stuff fascinating, okay? The combat is relatively simple, with some surprisingly easy to deal with bosses, but the musical implementations make them all very quirky and enjoyable, and just such a wacky and childish experience, which does make them far more interesting and memorable outside of that overly simplistic combat. The gameplay in general is also very simplistic, but the game's style and creativity are enough to still engage you in the strange and bizarre world that is the mind. Not recommended for people with a distaste towards puns, however. You have been warned. Cowards. The Wandering Village is an early access society management game that involves constructing a society out in the open wild from scratch, with managing villagers and buildings, only here you're doing so on top of a giant walking creature's back. So basically Age of Empires meets that Mortal Engines film minus all of the plundering and steampunk and geohistory nerds. With nearly all of the surface of the land being succumbed to a deadly poison, one of the only inhabitable areas remaining on the planet is on the back of this giant 6-legged creature we know as Onbu. So while you're in the middle of keeping your village thriving and making sure no one gets sick from the toxins, you also need to help maintain the well-being of Onbu, and make sure that you can both survive by giving them food, curing them from any poison, commanding them to walk towards rain clouds or biomes with better climates, and trying not to mine them of their natural resources too much that they'll end up altogether ignoring your commands. You can also choose to allow new refugees to enter your village who may or may not be infected, and send scavenging parties out to investigate structures far away from your your predetermined path. Of course, this game is still in early access, so there are a few things that can still be improved. It might just be something I haven't found yet, but it would be nice if I could set some more indefinite jobs for my villagers so I could get them harvesting wood supplies and stuff indefinitely, rather than having to click on each and every tree individually to get a now idle villager to earn some more wood from it when my count quickly drops back down to 0. Even after I did end up building my job market, they seemed to automatically collect all stone for me, but never the ever more prominent wood, which was odd. It would also be nice to be able to select multiple villagers, perhaps through dragging or auto-highlighting people of a certain profession or status to make job management much easier. But on the whole, I still feel like this was a very fun and relaxing ride, pun now intended, blame Figment too, and I absolutely adore the cartoony art style that the game incorporates, especially when you zoom in up close to the village. Although I'm not entirely sure what the end goal of this game is yet. You don't seem to get to replant trees, so by some point, it seems you'll be relying entirely on expeditions. Is this giant guy going to keep walking forever, or is there still some untainted land we're using them as transportation to get to? Either way, the game is still in development, so let us enjoy this journey and see what more there is to come from this. Alright, so the last game we'll be covering this month will be Serious Sam, Siberian Mayhem. And yes, I know Venba also arrives this July on the 31st, but by the time this video comes out, I'll be lucky if any of you even remember July ever happened. Ergo, that will be featuring over in the August catalogue, should I get onto that video. Anyway, I've not actually touched Serious Sam at all, so this is quintessentially my first impressions of the franchise as a whole. So let's see. We have a first-person shooter that deals with a wisecracking protagonist whose sole personality trait is bad guy shooting badass, mindlessly shooting shotgun at said bad guys charging right at you, very little time wasted reloading, colourful health and armor packs that you run over to acquire, and skill points found in boxes and hidden areas. I think we've got ourselves a modern boomer shooter on our hands, which pleases me a lot as a big fan of the Doom games as stated earlier on. You even get your Cacodemon, Pinky, and Mancubus lookalikes in this game, and they even kept that 90s grunting noise when you take damage. The game itself is meant to be a small expansion of the quite recent Serious Sam 4, with the story as simple as Mr. Sam arrives somewhere in Siberia where these alien forces have taken over numerous oil rigs and facilities, and only you can stop them by shooting the living hell out of them. And that's kinda all this seems to boil down to story-wise. That and his probable quest to clear all the catarrh he's got stuck in his throat. You get thrown straight into very fast-paced combat with non-stop aliens thrown at you, with all new types every couple of minutes, with very little space to breathe in between. Hell, they even added a unique gadget that slows everything down for you whenever it does get a bit too fast. Not to mention the game grants you more grenades than Bruno Mars could ever hope to catch, to the point where I ended up nearly having more than the actual shells on the shotgun they were attached to, which became very useful and downright overpowered in several situations. But with all that out of the way, I honestly ended up quite liking this game a lot. I was keen on the idea of being able to unlearn certain skills on the skill tree, allowing you to switch up your branches whenever you felt like it, without the need of grinding every single point if you wanted to shake the style up a certain way early on. And it maintains that classic versatility in weapons where it encourages optimizing certain weapons for certain types of enemies, as well as different strategies for overcoming each type. And again, there's still a great, fun sense of catharsis that many modern shooters in the same vein as Insurgency lack these days, so it's refreshing to still see games in this style about. As for my first impressions on Superabundant Samuel, he's basically if Duke Nukem entered the Doom universe. So Doom Nukem. Truth be told, this is actually the first time I've ever mass played all of the brand new releases on Game Pass, and I had such a big variety of games in such a short amount of time, but it has been overall a fun experience getting a load of these under my belt. In terms of recommendations, I'd say you have some decent ones for multiplayer. Insurgency Sandstorm is good for your standard multiplayer shooter. Naraka is fine, especially those who are too snobby for gunfights and wish for a return to a more civilized age of combat. But Exoprimal was strangely the one that stuck out for its dumb fun. And for what little story there is, or for how basic it treads in explaining it, the game still contains more than in both the other multiplayer games combined, so beggars can't be choosers in that regard. And I will go back and say that Arcade Paradise was wonderfully presented, and is one that I definitely encourage people to try out, in spite of my, shall we say, gut reactions to the game. And I feel like most of the games I ended up preferring came out towards the latter part of the month. TOEM was cute as can be, Figment was insightful and quirky fun, and both of our preview games made for an extra relaxing ride for the content they've provided so far. And now that I'm in a much clearer head about it, I can talk a little bit more about Maquette and why that game worked so well for me. Its core gameplay mechanic around the titular Maquette and ever-changing sizes of objects, and indeed the scenery added some much needed critical engagement to the experience, which made me engage my mind, which hence allowed me to become more emotionally engaged with the story too. It made it more than just a walking experience through this person's memories, and is honestly the sole reason why it made me cry in the end, because of how much that helped to draw me in. Not everyone got this experience out of the game by the looks, but everybody's different on how they take in these kinds of stories, and that's okay. So in summary, it's been a good and diverse month for games on this app, and I ended up liking the latter half of games more than the former. And that's about it. Oh, and FIFA 23 was added to cloud as well at the last minute. Oh crap, FIFA 23 is a football game published by EA